Hey folks, welcome to this next edition in our Worldographer 2025 101 series of videos. I'm Joe Wetzel, the creator of the program, and what you see in front of you, as usual, is just an auto-generated map that we made with Worldographer, and we'll go over that as we go over the other things in this video where we are focusing on the menu bar up here on the top, where we're going to show probably half of them. Some of the others involve saving or loading and things like that, so that'll be pretty much self-explanatory, but we'll get through the entire menu bar up here. Oh, and let me also add that we've done in prior videos all of these different drawers, or I should say tabs. Drawers is the pre-2025 approach. In the 2025 version, we've got tabs so that we, in particular, can have these internal scroll bars within the tabs so you can see all the controls as well as then scroll through all of the buttons, which I think is a small but key usability improvement. All right, we want to go to the file menu here, and the first few options are all about creating new maps of different types with different settings on dialogues that pop up. For example, New World Kingdom map, we've gone over all of this in quite a bit of detail in one of the earlier Worldographer 101 videos, so I'm not going to go through all of the controls here, but suffice it to say that a lot of this stuff here is new in 2025. The key things are if you want to set up your size of your map and number of pixels, you do that over here. And over here is where you can set all of the world generation stuff. If you're trying to generate just a region, you've got a different control over here. And then you can check these boxes on to have it auto-generate everything. But we're going to see a little bit later in the video where we're going to turn most of those off so we can do it in a step-by-step process. The new city, town, village setup screen is largely the same as in 2025, but again, we'll have some future videos. We're going to go over the details and the nuances of creating city and village maps, so we'll save that. Likewise, for a new battle dungeon map, we're going to have another video that will go into those details, and subsector cosmic maps for something like Traveler, we'll have that in another video too. All right, so now we've got just the basic options of open and then open recent, where it just saves the most recent 10 things that you've opened. This map is something more typically used for battle maps, where you can say, hey, I want to take this little dungeon section and bring it into another map, and you can do that with this option. Make dungeon geomorph map, you can give it a folder of different dungeon sections and create a larger map using those dungeon sections. Again, we'll save that for the dungeon battle mat video in the near future. Save and save as, do exactly what you would think. Then import. So if you've been working with Hexographer and you've got a map file saved in Hexographer's format, you can import it here. You can also import it into a current map to add it to a region, to a specific point. And the nice thing there is that you can spell out, hey, what is the X and Y coordinate of the hex tile that you want, and it will put the upper left corner of the new map in that location. Then you've got Dungeonographer stuff and Cityographer as well. And those three programs goes back to about 2008 and got retired in 2017, 2018 when we started Worldographer. And now we're on Worldographer 2025. Export image and export selected area as an image. So with export image, it will export the entire map for you. If you wanted to export a selected area as an image, what you can do here is it tells you, hey, you need to select an area. And so you can go up to the edit menu, select a map area, and click and drag is the easiest way to do this. Although you can also click points too, although my mouse is a little finicky. So sometimes it'll double click or it will click where I don't intend. So I do a click drag. And this selected area would be exported instead. Now, as you can see, we're getting a little long with this menu bar, so in the near future you might see those collapsed in the same option with just a note on the export image dialog. One other thing I want to say about export image, and so if I hit this, it'll tell you if you want a larger map, more pixels, to change the width and the height under the mini map so that it will give you more pixels, because if I hit continue, the next thing is going to tell me, hey, you can enter in the DPI. This is just some metadata that's thrown into the image. Most printers, most print shops, if you were to take it to a print shop, will let you scale it to whatever size the paper is if you want, or whatever print size you want to pick. But if there's not enough pixels in it, it's going to look pixelated. This map here is 100 hexes high. So it's roughly a little over 4,000 pixels high, because there's a little bit of an extra half hex because of the staggered nature of hexes. So it's a little over 4,000 pixels if I were to export this. Now the width is a little bit more complicated to do the math on it because you've got some staggering of hexes going on there too. But suffice to say, that's a 4,000 pixel image high. So if I printed it out on 8.5 by 11 and went landscape, I'm actually hitting 450 or almost 500 pixels per inch, which is great. This disclaimer here tells you, hey, 300 dpi is typical for printed images. The human eye only sees 150. 72 is what is used oftentimes for screen reading and stuff. But suffice it to say, the more pixels you have, the sharper the image will look if people squint and look at it closely or whatever, or if you want to scale it up so that, like I said, it's 4,000 pixels, so 8.5 by 11. If that's 8 inches is what it's using, like I said, you're going to be getting over 400 pixels per inch. But if I were to try to poster print that, now I'm going to be much, much lower. I'm not going to do the math in my head. I can integrate, I can't add, or divide in this case. Yeah, so if you want those extra pixels, you can change this. And if you don't want it because you want to save file space, for example, or something, you can make it smaller. However, even better, to save you from doing all that math of how many pixels per inch do I have or need or whatever, you can export to PDF, and you can also export a selected area to a PDF. And what this is going to do, both of these are going to bring up a similar dialog. And you can say, hey, do I want my export to be a fixed size for each tile? For example, I want 4 tiles per inch, so each tile is going to be 1/4 inch. Or I can change this and do 1-inch hexes, for example. Or we can scale the map up to fit a full page. And so you can then set the size of the page to whatever we have here. So if you're European and you're using some of these formats here, or I guess pretty much everybody but the US, you can do so. Or if you are in the US, then you can pick these here. If you want a poster print at 2 feet by 3 feet on a poster, you can pick that, and it's going to put your image on a PDF of that size. You can rotate it 90 degrees. So in this case, we would want to rotate it 90 degrees so that we're landscape essentially. And then we can have a custom page size. If none of these formats are a good fit, you can change those. You can also change the units. So if you want to go to centimeters, you can do that, and you can play with the margins. So that poster print of 24 inches by 36 inches, you can put a 1-inch margin around it all, or a 1/2 inch, or whatever you want. That said, it's going to also look at the aspect ratio of your hexes and everything, and so you probably are going to end up with a wider margin in one dimension or the other, but it's going to try to fit as much of that as possible. All right, that was a deeper dive into export image and export PDF, but I hope it was useful. Next up is export notes information. Now this is new as of version 1.06 of the beta for Worldographer 2025. And with export notes and information, you can spell out, hey, do you want to export the world info and notes, world info only, or notes? Let's talk about those. Let's hit cancel here. Let's do add, edit, view, note here so we can show the notes that are on the map. I'm going to turn off the selected area. And so I can click on a city here, for example, and it's going to pull up a bunch of randomly generated bulleted lists here of different things about that city, which then you're free to fully change. It's just what you see is what you get kind of editor here. So you can change it all up. You can regenerate it. You can wipe it out and just start from scratch if you prefer. And we've got other videos that go over more stuff here, but just wanted to show you what the notes on the map are like. And then also we have world info up here on the data menu. So when you generate a world in Worldographer, it's going to create a number of nations about that world and just give you a couple of bullet points for those. And then give you some cultures and give you some bullet points about those cultures, and then religions. And for the religions, some of them are going to be monotheistic, and there's a demon sect and a mystical thing and another one, and then some pantheons here with gods in each pantheon. And then finally, we've got timelines, which is just more free form, just like the intro up at the top, where you can add in more child nodes if you'd like onto that. on the timelines there to have the ages of your world, the first age, a second age, third age, and it goes from this year to that year. Or even just spell out, hey, something specific happened. This particular year was a big cataclysm. There's a lot of stuff that happened. You want to go into details about that. You can put all that information here and save that. That's what the notes and information are. So you can choose to export all of it, world info only notes, and then what the format is that you want to use for your export. So you can do HTML. You can do new as Markdown. We used to just do HTML, and then why not do plain text too, just in case. Markdown is a format that a lot of message boards use. It's a little bit easier. You don't have to worry quite so much about closing some tags and stuff. So you can export in that format as well. And finally, then you can check a box here to have little small images of each note that's on the map, where it's just going to take a little image of that particular feature and the surrounding hex or so around it and make little images. And if you're going to do that, you'd probably want to do it to its own folder so you can easily delete them all and replace them all in the future. And then if I hit OK there, it would bring up a file chooser for me to give it the main file name for that HTML, Markdown, or plain text file, and then it would do its work of exporting. All right, next up, export as a UVTT file. So this is something more so for battle mats, especially right now. I hope that there'll be some better format, some new thing, or expanding the UVTT for other map types besides battle mats. But at the moment, it'll export whatever your file is as a battle mat, where it's going to basically embed an image of your map into that file, along with some, I think it's a JSON file, where it has information about the walls and the lights and so forth, so that you can import it into a VTT, such as a plugin for Roll20 that we were testing with, and there's something for Foundry and some others, as well as some other map tools that will import it as well. All right, and then finally we got exit on there. So then edit. Edit is a little bit easier, and there's not nearly as much. So you already saw me using select the map area. You've got cut, copy, paste options, because you're able to cut, copy, paste things on the map, and you can choose what things do you want to cut, copy, and paste. And I'm going to go to one of these smaller islands around. So I'm going to go to this little island over here, and I'm going to go to select map area, and I'm going to drag across this map area. And we're going to do a edit, copy. And then I'm going to select another spot here, just a little bit further off here. So it'll paste wherever I have my mouse if I don't have a selected area. So I can just go ahead here and go to Control V, and you can see that it pasted those features and that terrain there in that location that I had. It is a little finicky, so sometimes you might have to paste it and then move the features around a little bit, but that's the goal, and it certainly saves you time compared to doing it all from scratch. Maybe not so for a three hex island, but for a larger island of 10 hexes or something, it would certainly be useful. And note that you've got this align paste with grid checkbox here, so you're going to want to keep that in mind. Otherwise, it could shift. Like, you have to be extra precise with where you're going to place things, and you might undo, redo in order to get it to be just right if you don't have that on. And then you can control what things are being copied and pasted, because sometimes, for example, a ship, and I use this for battle mats sometimes for a ship where I want the outline of the ship repeated for multiple levels. Granted, it'll be a little bit smaller, so I might tweak the points afterward a little bit, but I'll take that shape of that ship and paste it a little bit further to the side to do the next level of the ship. And in that case, though, I don't want the features, because the bunks and everything else on the one level are going to be completely different, or not going to be. The next level might be the cargo hold. So I would exclude most of these and really just do the shapes in that case. And then we've got undo, redo, as you'd expect, and delete are all options here as well. Speaking of options, we have an options tab here. So here you can choose the theme that you want for Worldographer. You can use what I've got right here is this Dracula theme that I think is cool. There's a dark theme here, which is the default if I remember right. And then there's also a light theme if you'd prefer it. I'm going to go back to Mayan Then we've got auto update other map levels. This is something for the World, Continent, Kingdom, Province functionality where you can have multiple levels of the map. And if you want objects to move automatically on the other layers, as you move them on the current layer. Show details on hover. You can then hover over any hex and it will give you the details about that hex. What feature might be there? What do they have available? Some of the node information that we saw before. When I'm not using it, I find it distracting, so I turn it off typically. Select shapes by clicking inside polygons. Let's go over the shapes drawer here. Select. So if you click on any of these points, that's how you normally will select a shape. But if I have a polygon there and then I deselect it and then I choose select, if I just click in the middle, nothing's going to happen. But if you have this turned on, options, select shapes by clicking inside the polygons, you can then click inside and it will select. There you go. All right, next option, I'm going to turn that one off though and go here. If you turn off the scroll wheel, scroll zooms in and out, then you might get into some panning instead. Of course, you can always move the mini map up here or pan with this or use the scroll bar. Autosave, Worldographer will save your file every couple of minutes automatically for you to a, whatever your file name is, -autosave.wxx. It's helpful sometimes if your computer were to crash or something, you would only be a couple of minutes out of date with your file. Tools, so tools are really useful and helpful here. Expand, shrink columns and rows brings up this dialog here where you can add in or remove columns or rows of information to Worldographer. Now, I recommend that you do them by twos because of the staggered nature of hexes, particularly right now at the top. I wouldn't want to add 3 hexes to the top because then it's going to shift some things off. And then if you have your hexes set up the other way, then you wouldn't want to move them over onto the left or add them to the left unless it's in multiples of 2. Terrain Wizard is a lot of fun, and I just always love showing it whenever I can. So we can do a blank map, and I'm going to just set this up to be real small and 20 by 16. Generate this little map, go back to the terrain. And this is going to do a nearest neighbor fill for us. And I'm going to just stick a mountain range right across the middle. And I'm going to set up some hills over here that are barren hills, if you will. Whereas on the other side, I'm going to maybe have some evergreen hills because this will cut off our water to the other side, essentially. And then I can throw in some... We've got some desert over, or some forest. So I've got some heavy forest over here, but then I've got it surrounded by some lighter forest, and then I've got some mixed forest for the heck of it. No, maybe I just have some grassland. There's not as much vegetation, or not as much water over there. And I've got some plain farmland too, just sprinkled around a little bit. Yeah, we'll just see what that does for us over there. And then over here, I'm going to do some desert here, some cactus desert, and I'll do some, it might be too much cactus desert, so I'll just do the other kind of desert there, and sandy desert as well. And then we'll do some more grassland, just to have a divider for where we have that versus regular plain kind of prairie farmland or whatever you want to call it. And just for fun, we'll throw in some swamp down here. Well, maybe I'll just do the swamp there so that I can do water. Yeah. So we got some sea over here just on the very edge. So the nice thing here, as I said, it just does a nearest neighbor fill for us. Oh, I want to have one more variety. What's something else I can stick up there in that corner? Oh, Badlands. Let's do some Badlands. Come on. Where's my Badlands at? Other. It's in Other Badlands. There we go. I like this one. So I'm going to stick some of this in too. And then I can do the nearest neighbor fill. However, I'm going to also add in shuffle. Shuffle is going to give me a little bit of extra variety. So I do Tools, Terrain Wizard, and there you go. So you can see it added in this little bad grasslands, and it added in a grassland up here in the hills, and some shrubland, and here's a desert dune. So it adds in a little bit of extra stuff. Here's a mountain. So that similar stuff added in some extra terrain to our map. But for a map of this size, it's not as big of a thing because we ended up filling in nearly half the map anyway. But for a much larger map, it's fun to do and gives you a way to make your overall map more quickly. So that's Terrain Wizard. I switched terrain to isometric style. As you probably know, Worldographer has two main built-in icon sets. There's also a third where we can kind of do a World of Greyhawk style with some additional settings and some of the other built-in icons that reuse some of the Mystara stuff. But we've got the classic style and isometric style. So if I go isometric, it uses this stuff. Now, Badlands doesn't have a couple of these terrain types. It doesn't have direct mappings, so you would want to change those out. So I switch this to ISO calls, and I filtered by desert here. Then I can fill in a couple, turn off similar, or turn off shuffle rather, but I can turn on similar. Similar is going to give me a desert sandy A and desert sandy B and desert sandy C. So if I pick desert sandy A, it's going to use any of those. And say up here I've got hills that I want to replace. So I filter by the hills and I stick that one in there. And just for time purposes, I'm just going to replace that with hills anyway. And then these other Badlands kinds of things. Well, we should have something similar to Badlands. There we go. So we got a different Badlands kind of thing here, and so I can fill these guys in as well. So that's switching the terrain to isometric. I'll come back to classic in a minute, but then we also have this make isometric mountains into features. So that just gives us more feature icons of mountains. So it removes the mountain icon from the terrain and then fills it in with at least one and usually two or three different mountain icons. Let's zoom in here so you can see that, hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this ended up having 9 mountains for us. And so it's an automatic thing that you just go up here to tools. Now, if I do Control Z, we can get that back. Oh, and the other thing is when you're switching to the isometric set, you're also going to want to change your aspect ratio here because it's intended to be shown at a different size. Let's do Control Y to redo that. And then let's go back to uncheck this. And it's going to be, these icons are just going to look a little bit better when they're a little bit squished. Something like that. I forget the exact ratio, but it's something along those lines. So yeah, and then we could go back to tools, and actually I need to undo the there we go. I need to undo that change for the features for the mountains, and then I can switch it back to the classic style, and then I can set this back to, I wish I had written down what it was, but it was something more like 150 something, and then zoom out so that you can see more of the map. So you've got that functionality all in the tools. Convert underlay will let you have a map on that you set up on trace underlay, so you can trace a map, and convert underlay will attempt to map those colors for you. So if the map colors are similar to what Worldographer uses as far as the mountains and hills and so forth and forests, if the map you're tracing uses a similar color scheme, then convert underlay might get you a map that gets more than half of the terrain correct for you. I'm running long with this video already, so I'm not going to get into the details there. But it'll give you a dialog with a number of different terrain types in Worldographer for it to try to use. And the thing there, though, is the more terrain types you use, the more chances it might make mistakes. If you give it 10 different things that are different shades of hills and mountains, then it it's more likely to pick the wrong one for you. So you're better off just having one mountain type, than one hill type, one forest type, one grassland type, or whatever, and using those icons to, those terrain types to match with the colors of the map that you're tracing. Map key. So I'm going to go back to the other map for this example. Setup map key is powerful and something I don't give enough attention usually. But if you want your map key to be auto-generated, just give it a height more than -1. So if we give it a height of, say, 50, because we want to have everything in one column, possibly, we might even need to do 70, depending on how many different features are used on the map. And then you can give it a title, and you can say the scale is 1 hex equals 60 miles, or whatever you want it to be. You can play with the fonts and everything. And then for this, when you bring up this dialog, it's automatically looking at all the terrain that's been added to your map, and it's going to add that to this list. And if you don't want it to show up, you can give it a value of 0 in these. Otherwise, it's going to go in order. And you can skip. So if I don't want classic forest evergreen to show up in the map key for some reason, I can set this to 0, and it's okay to go from 5 to 7. It's still going to go in order. So it'll do all the terrain. Likewise, it'll look through all of your features, all your little icons of your this shrine and this camp and a ruins and city and town and all those things. It's going to put all of those into an alphabetically ordered list. Now, the alphabetical is by the name of the feature in the program. So you've got building, classic building cottage, not just cottage. And you can change these labels with this column here, just like with the terrain. You can change those as well. And it uses the same ordering, and you can size up how big the icon will be in that map key. Now note that it's not going to do anything with the coast, river, or mouth in the name, because those would just dominate 50 or 80 entries that are just different coasts. And then the same thing for shapes, though. It'll look at all the shapes, and it will look at the tags that you've added to your shapes, and it's going to add those to a key as well. And then if you wanted to add some additional terrain or feature, you can do that, where it will add another row of data for you to enter in case if there's something special, something you want to put in the key that's not on the map necessarily. Don't know why you would, but that's there. You can't do that with a shape because there's not enough room for us to put all the controls for what color shape and what fill for the shape and so on and so forth. Whereas here, this is just going to match the color and the fill and everything of that shape. And these are different country borders that you'll see in a moment. You can clear and update. So if you make a bunch of changes to the map and you want to clear and update things, or you can just update the entries, your choice. Hit OK. And sure enough, even though that was 70 rows high, it's still not high enough because we had to go to a second column here. Yeah, so that's the setup map key functionality. It was called generate map key, but since we have a generate menu over here, I didn't want to overlap with that. Okay, configure. Well, since we're already something like 30 minutes into this video already, I will save configure for its own video because there's lots of different ways to add terrain and add features and textures to the tool. There's 3 different ways, and there's different nuances with the different ways and different dialogues for most of these things. Likewise for data about your world, where you're going to have ways to configure this data for the city mapping functionality here, or even the data for the notes that pop up. There's ways to configure all that here, and that could be, and it will be, its own video. Generate something. We're going to do that really quickly here. We're going to go to File, New World Kingdom Map, and we're going to go back to our 200 hex by 100 hex map, and we're going to have it be a world. And we're going to turn all of these off. Now, we don't need to worry about the sub checkboxes, but we're going to turn all those off because we're going to do them step by step. And the nice thing about doing those step by step is I can tweak the terrain here if I wanted to. If I want to add in some other badlands here, for example, I can do that, or whatever I want to put in here. And then I can go to generate. Now, the generating the map level is something a little bit different. Let's take care of that in our smaller map. So here we can go to generate map level. We can also do the same functionality by using the drop down here. we can go to and create a continent or map from the world map. Now you can't jump, but we can go to generate map level here, and we can say, hey, based on the world level, let's create the continent level, and let's pick 6 hexes across per hex in the parent, and hit OK, and we get a map like this. So the generate menus version of this, as opposed to the drop down over here, lets you regenerate a map level. So in this case, you'd always be going to the existing continent level if you've already got it. Whereas over here, you can choose to recreate the continent level if there's a reason for you to do so. You can also delete a map level here with this. So we can go delete, and we can say delete the world or the continent map, whichever. So that's the map level functionality here. But this just lets you have a map at a smaller scale than the parent map, if you will. Going back to the example that we are setting up, though, for this map here, so now I can generate coasts. And instead of doing it all in one step from that setup dialog, now we can tweak that terrain, and we can convert these adjacent water hexes into sea. And how do you want to do it? Which approach do you want? Still have a typo here. We can use classic coast features, which is what you saw on the prior map. Here, let's do it as shapes instead. Hit OK, and what it's doing up here is it's giving you the progress bar. Also new in 2025 is having a progress bar up here, status information telling you as it's doing its work, what it's doing and how far is it along, which I find more valuable than having a little pop-up that you always have to close, particularly for quicker things, something that generates within 3-4 seconds. I don't want to have to close it, but in this case where it's going through and it's adding in shapes. Now this does take a little bit longer than the features approach. If you were to add little features of coast to the map, that's faster. All it has to do is look and find the different water hexes that have land adjacent, and then look at how much land versus water, which hexes that are adjacent are water versus land, and pick a feature. But for a shape, it has to do all of that and then randomly create a number, 10, 20, 30 different points to create a shape. But this result is a little bit more flexible. But in either case, you can do that through the generate. We can also generate we can also delete all of the coasts with this option. So anything that has the tag coast will get deleted. And so just to show you that, so if I go to shapes and we go to select and we pick one of these shapes here, if we scroll down here, you can see that the tag here has coastline in it. So anything with that tag would get deleted. Generate rivers. Generate rivers lets us pick a number of rivers to add to the map based on how many tiles there are. This map here is 200 by 100 tiles, so 20,000 tiles. If we were to pick 10 here, we would end up with 20 rivers on the map. And you can choose to have features or shapes, or for your shapes, do you want them to be classic or textured? Classic is flat colors, just plain. Textured is like a little bit of a water texture, which is good for the isometric maps. We can go ahead and hit shapes. And if we just pan it, yeah, so you can see that it created this guy here. And it's created several of them, I'm sure, on the map here. Generate nations and empires would be our next step here. So we can go ahead and make 20 nations and empires for this world. And then you can choose, do you want the borders to all be one color, or do you want them to vary in color? In the other map that I was showing, we had it as varying. So in this case, I'm going to have it all one color. You can also fill with translucency, which is better for if they are different colors. So you can see which terrain goes with which nation. But this is more accurate if you're trying to replicate the classic Mystara maps that were created by TSR in the 80s. And then back to generate, we can generate hex crawl locations. So this will add extra ruins and things of interest throughout the map. And you can check the frequency. Do you want them to have a 10% chance, or? So it added a whole bunch of things to our map. Generate roads next. And so do we want to have villages and forts as well? We can hit OK. It's for each city and town and village and so forth. It's trying to find the nearest thing and connect them. And so that's what it does. And we could have chosen to make them in a couple of different ways. This is our fractal lines, where it's just drawing a line from point to point, but then it's trying to add some variation to that line. Then we can also do it as a curve, and we can do it as a straight line if that's the style map that you want. And then regenerate resources. As you might have seen if you were looking closely as I turned on show details on hover, you can see that it tells you this particular hex has animal life is 41% and the crops are 51%, but brick is 0 or whatever. And that varies, of course. For a mountain, you're going to have more rock and potentially gems and so forth, whereas you're not going to have much in the way of animal life, for example. So if you wanted to, you can see those also if you select terrain, and you would see it pop up here. So if I pick this hex here, you can see that all these values changed here. So that's the other way to see it, and you could change it if you wanted to. We do use it for where to place cities and towns and so forth, but otherwise it doesn't really get used. But if you want to regenerate all those numbers for some reason, you can do that here with regenerate resources. Data, we showed what world info was earlier in the video. Terrain stats gives you how prevalent is different terrain on the map. And update world name data file just gives you a dialog to choose a file to customize the naming information for the world. Help, license, show log, show memory usage, reset properties. Reset properties, so all of those values on the beginning of the startup screen here, for example, these things get saved in the registry information with Worldographer. Likewise for the other dialogues and some information that we store. And so if you want to reset that to the defaults, you can go ahead and hit reset. All right, so that covers our menu bar except for configure, because that does need its own video. But I hope that's useful for you. I'll have the link to download Worldographer 2025. This is beta 1.06, so a couple of these things, particularly the export notes, is new in the 1.06 beta, and some other bug fixes as well. So if you don't have that, you probably do want to get it. You'll see in the menu bar update available also when there is an update, so you can then click that and it'll give you a list of what's new and changed, and take you to the website to download. If you see that, you should consider updating it. All right, I hope this video has been useful to you. I hope you're able to make some great maps with the software, and hope you're having a great day. Thanks.